Okay, should I kick off?
Let's do it.
Yeah, good. All right. Hi, everyone. As Jaden says, thanks for coming to our presentation. We're getting very close to Jakarta EE 10 and the Jakarta EE 10 release date, which is due in around June timeframe now. There's a slight delay from May, and it's all scheduled to be in June. All the specifications for Jakarta EE 10 are in what's called ballot, which means they're in the position where they're all getting approved. And then once they're all approved, we can approve the platform itself, which is like Uber specification that incorporates all the other APIs. So this was a good time to start kicking off or reminding people really what's happening in Jakarta EE 10 and how that impacts the Payara platform. So based on my agenda, I'm going to talk little bit about Jakarta EE 10 changes. It's not going to be super technical, but I'll do a quick scan around the key things that may be important to you and into your applications and the supportability of your applications. I will then go through Payara specific support timelines. I'm going to go through Jakarta EE 10 support timeline, describe when we're likely to support that, what is our supported product, how that works in community. And then again, many of you will be still on Jakarta EE 8, so I will also cover Jakarta EE 8 support and how that looks and how long do we just support that on the enterprise product. And then finally, I'm going to do very briefly a little summary of the rest of this year's roadmap. Our roadmap this year has been heavily influenced by supporting Jakarta EE 10. For obvious reasons, but I will touch on some of the things we're planning Q3 and Q4 of this calendar year. So let's kick off. Like as Jaden says, please feel free to ask questions. The presentation won't take the whole time that we have scheduled, so chip in and I'll try my best.
Yeah, we'll have plenty of time. And if you put it in the chat, I can always interject when there's a natural pause.
Yeah,
or you
sure.
can put it in the Q&A section.
That's fine. Okay, so Jakarta EE 10 changes and how they impact you. I'm going to talk about this in the context of someone who's developing in Jakarta EE 8. There was obviously a release in between called Jakarta EE 9, but that predominantly was just a change that was targeted not specifically at developers, but at tool vendors and sort of vendors like ourselves, so that we could get to grips with Jakarta EE 9 and some of the main namespace changes. So as I touched on the namespace change, the biggest change if you're a Jakarta EE 8 developer that you will see is the complete change of the namespace of all the APIs that you use. So what does that actually mean? So during the migration from Oracle into the Eclipse Foundation, one thing that we didn't manage to achieve was a copyright or trademark over javax. For obvious reasons, that remains with Oracle, as they have a whole bunch of other APIs that are in that namespace. So we had to come up with another namespace, and that namespace is Jakarta. But practically what that means is, one, having a new namespace means that the actual Eclipse Foundation can move and evolve and improve and create new APIs. Previously, if it's remained in javax, that would be impossible because it would imply that that these were endorsed by the JCP, which is not the case. So, and then the second practical thing, obviously, is every import in your code is likely to have to change as you move over from a Jakarta EE application over into a Jakarta EE 8 application over into a Jakarta EE 10 application. And these are obviously some of the APIs that you'll have to change, and some of these APIs that you would typically use. So I've highlighted some in yellow that are used and that are used externally, so just using Jakarta EE, for example, by Spring and other frameworks like that. So for example, baseline Jakarta inject for @inject and @inject annotations, that's changing from javax to Jakarta. JMS, any messaging APIs have to move from javax to Jakarta to support Jakarta EE 9+. There's Java Mail, Jakarta persistence or Java persistence, which often heavily used in Hibernate and Spring, that will obviously all changes as well to the new namespace. Servlet, obviously transactions. So javax transaction is a very widely used API. It's not all of it that's changing, but parts of it are changing to the Jakarta namespace. And similarly with WebSocket and XML binding, again, very widely used APIs. For them to migrate and for them to evolve, they've all had to change to the Jakarta namespace. So that has obviously a massive impact onto your applications. Applications do need to move and at source code level onto the Jakarta namespace. Another big change between Jakarta EE 8 and Jakarta EE 10 is the version of Java is changing as a baseline. So Jakarta EE 8 was baselined on JDK Java SE 8 at its API level and at its compilation level. That's bumping up. So in Jakarta EE 10, that's moving to Java 11 at the API level and also at the compilation level, the class file format level. So this means that you won't be able to use Java 8 on a Jakarta EE 10 runtime or application server or anything that's using those APIs. Some people complain that why didn't we go to 17? I mean, this is the baseline for the API and the baseline that the class files are generated in. None of this prevents applications using JDK 17 APIs. All it means is the Jakarta APIs themselves don't. So the reason we do this is to make sure that there is a common baseline and we're not driving people too fast onto the latest versions just purely through compiling with the latest versions. So Jakarta EE 10 also has the TCK, which we all have to pass to prove we're compatible, can run on 17 and can certify implementations that are just purely based on 17. So both Payara can create a 17-based implementation or any other vendor, and your applications can use 17 APIs. But what you won't be able to do if you're still on it is use JDK 8. So that a couple of the big breaking changes for some people that you will encounter. Then we go into what were the goals of Jakarta EE 10 when it set out to be on its release cycle 18 months ago. So we have three key goals. The first is to be modernized. So briefly, what that goal is about is basically up-revving the Java SE level, making sure that APIs, the Jakarta APIs are using capabilities that are in 11 and actually in 8, because some of those got missed out. So for example, specs are upgrading to use completable futures, fork child pools, better metadata for JPMS, and generally on the modernization theme, also better integration with new technologies like OAuth, OpenID, and other things that have come along since the days of Jakarta EE 8. Another big theme was simplification. So simplification across the platform. Jakarta EE has generated, carried on a lot of bulk over its time as it's evolved. It's been around 20 odd years, 20 plus years, and it's acquired lots of different APIs which have been deprecated, moved off. For example, to certify for Jakarta EE 8, it was still optional to have CMP entity beans, but CMP entity beans haven't been around for a long time. So a lot of one of the goals of GE 10 was to remove a lot of that deprecated stuff. And I'll talk a little bit about it on some of the APIs. So that will have gone, and if you're using some of those things, then that may impact your application. Also around simplification, there's a long sort of running story arc, if you like, to better integrate with CDI. So what you'll see is more and more of the APIs are adopting CDI as a baseline or providing integration into CDI as a sort of unifying programming bean model for the platform. Not everything will have done it in this release, but as I said, it's a story arc, and our intention is to roll that out more and more as we go into later releases like Jakarta 11. And similarly to that as well, one of the things that I've been conscious about in some of the APIs I've been involved in is the ability to not have to use anything like a deployment descriptor to deploy resources that your application will need. So work has been done in the past to, to have deployable data sources which are attached to your application through annotations, and there's more annotation deployment capabilities rolling out in different APIs. For example, in concurrency, you can deploy managed executors and thread pools, etc., through annotations packaged up in your application. So you don't need to run, application server admin commands or create XML deployment descriptors to set this sort of thing up. And the third goal was to be more lightweight. So I'll touch on this a bit later. Part of the lightweight is obviously removing old APIs that are no longer needed. That makes it, from a Payara perspective, means we don't need to ship the infrastructure that supports those APIs, which means they will have gone in runtimes. But also, I've got a slide on it. There's a dedicated profile that is targeting explicitly different types of runtime. So this is the whole EE10 platform, and thanks to Ivar from the Eclipse Foundation, I've stolen his slide because it illustrates what's the scope of the change in EE10. So these are all the APIs that are in Jakarta platform. And everything that is blue is being updated. Everything that's orange, we haven't got any lot of new APIs in here. That's more likely to be in EE11. But everything blue has been updated for EE10. Everything gray hasn't, so that's just stayed exactly the same. Anything with a .0 has major new capabilities or has breaking changes within it. Many of the breaking changes will be around removal of deprecated APIs. But also some specs like concurrency up-rev to a major because they've got major new capabilities in there. So as you can see that there's a lot of change. A lot of specifications have been touched during this 18 months. And I'll touch on briefly some of the highlights of that. One of the new things that is in there on that slide previously is we have created a new profile. So previously there were two profiles. There was the web profile, which was targeted at purely web applications, and there was a full platform which covered everything, and that included JMS and things like connectors and those sort of things. So the core profile is really a new one. It has a new test suite, and it is targeted as a baseline for new runtimes. So, and I'll explain that a little bit. So it's actually the baseline that was in Microprofile, basically what Microprofile built on from Jakarta EE platform, except CDI Lite 4.0. So what we've done in releasing the core profile is the CDI team have taken CDI as was and split it into Lite and SE and then full. What the biggest difference between Lite and normal CDI is they have adapted parts of the API which would require deploy time, discovery of things like portable extensions. So removing or redesigning some of those capabilities, so you can still create extensions, they're just not deploy time discoverable, means that in theory, this profile doesn't require sort of that dynamic loading of classes on the fly. And that means it is a good profile that can be baseline used to build runtimes that could target ahead of time compilation and therefore could be a baseline for things like Quarkus or Helidon or other runtimes that may come along in the future. So splitting this out means that we can just create a profile that could be used purely for building REST-based microservices. Not everything in there is potentially all you need. Obviously there's no persistence. So different runtimes will give you capabilities to add in or remove different APIs that you may need. However, so the baseline for that is essentially takes what microprofile was built on top of, and then it adapts CDI to split it and remove some of the more problematic pieces for ahead of time compilation. The core profile will be released at the same time as the other profiles, and there's a separate TCK. Another key aspect of core profile is it doesn't require a WAR file deployment. In fact, it doesn't specify a format for deployment. So again, this is key for people innovating and creating new runtimes that support the individual APIs that are listed there. So I'm now going to run through some sort of boring looking slides, but I'm going to do a very quick list of some of the changes that are in various specifications. And again, a lot of the change on the back, a lot of the breaking changes will be around removal of deprecation. So I haven't gone into all that. So one of the ones I put on first, because I was involved, it was concurrency. Concurrency was a sort of lesser known specification, but it's actually pretty fundamental, as it enables you to use basically Java SE concurrency primitives within a Jakarta EE runtime and carry over your context like security or those sort of things, and class loading and etc. So concurrency has a new async annotation. What this will allow you to do is attach it onto a CDI bean and effectively get it called async, called on another thread. We've also taken all the capabilities that were in microprofile context propagation, and they've been ported over into Jakarta, and they form part of Jakarta concurrency. And that includes things like computable future support, being able to run threads on the fork join pool. It has cron schedules, and another big one, as I mentioned earlier, is deployable resources. So you can annotate that your application uses different managed executors or different thread pools, and put that annotation on your application, and they'll be deployed by the server of the runtime. So that's got a lot of new capabilities in. It's also been put into web profiles, so it's a baseline for the profiles. It's not currently in core, but for some reason previously inexplicably it wasn't in web profile. It's pretty fundamental and doesn't have any dependencies really on other APIs. Faces has had a lot of change. If you still use Jakarta Faces, so it's removed a lot of old support. It now has a completely programmable implementation, so you can write pure Java. You don't necessarily have to write the XML. And it's more and more getting based on CDI beans as its bean model. So managed beans has been removed, and it's supported on CDI. Jakarta REST has actually done a minor API change. They have done a lot of work on a major, but that's likely to be the next Jakarta release. But it has done better integration. It has a complete Java SE based Bootstrap API, so you don't need to run it within a container. It's standardized some of the capabilities like multi-part that were available in Jersey and REST Easy, but it's created standards versions of those. And it's got better integrations to some of the other Jakarta APIs like JSONB. So you can see that's part of the simplification and making the platform more coherent. Again, CDI has done a major release. The major release, the biggest feature was obviously moving to CDI Lite, which is reflectionless for the core profile. Another big change, it's probably not big from a technical perspective as the spec developers, but big from a behavior perspective, maybe as an application developer, is that an empty beans.xml is now defaulted to annotated. So rather than all, previously it was all, and your whole of your jar would be scanned for bean to see if they had bean defining. Sorry, so everything that in there was a bean would be created as a CDI bean. Now it's moved to the default will be annotated. So you'll only have a CDI bean if it has a bean defining annotation. Servlet 6 has used has removed, again, a lot of deprecated items. Tomcat's already getting developed on Servlet 6 and the Jakarta namespace, the latest versions. And there's alphas and betas. I don't know if there's a beta, but I know there's definitely alphas out. Security from part of modernization now supports OpenID, Connect, and based on top of OAuth. And then again, some of the improvements are really just modernization. So JSONB supports polymorphic types. JPA has various new functions to keep track and keep up to date with the underlying databases, and supports UUIDs as primary keys. So again, that has been moved and upgraded. So taken in its whole, there's a lot of changes. They're all most of them are very small. We don't or seem quite small, but in the whole, there's quite a big up-rev of the platform after Jakarta EE8. There's also a lot of removal of deprecation. So it should meet the goals that I talked about. So let's move on to the Payara platform. I don't know if Jaden has any questions on that aspects before we dive into our support.
Hi, yes, there's actually two questions currently. One from Oliver and another one from Carlos. The Oliver one is quite a long question though, so I don't know if you can see it in the Q&A section. Might make it easier than me reading it out.
Do you want to read it out because I can't see it?
Oh, okay, yeah, no problem. So Oliver says, as you said, EE10 is slightly delayed until June. There is no Payara 6 alpha available with EE10 depths available, only EE 9.1. Will there be a time slot where larger applications like Dataverse will be able to test with their EE10 enabled alpha before you release a P6, which will be cease Payara 5 community support?
I'll cover that in the next few bits, actually.
Okay.
So we've got anything purely around Jakarta EE itself, because I'll kind of cover Payara support timelines. So,
yeah. So I think that's what I want to know because of the time slot for testing and verifying and moving on. The one from Carlos is regarding JSONB. How is integration with JDK 17 records coming along? Can one use a record as a DTO in Jakarta 10 straight away?
I have no idea is the answer to that one. So I haven't tracked JSONB that closely. There won't be anything in the API specifically to support it because that I'm aware of at this point in time. But then again, I'm not a specialist on JSONB.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, that's all the questions so far.
Okay. So as you just mentioned in the question, I'm going to go through how Jakarta, what's the Payara timeline for supporting 10. So we've already released Alpha 2. So Alpha 2 for Payara 6 is the namespace change. And that's Jakarta EE 9 compatible. So it is the new namespace, but it's Jakarta EE 9 compatible, not Jakarta EE 10. So we can use that. It has fully passed the TCK. So if you want to just look at purely migrating namespace, then that has been available for quite a while now. So this is what our timeline looks like for Payara 6. And I haven't got everything on here. So I will describe some of where we are. So in February, we released Payara 6 Alpha 2. It's Jakarta EE 9 compatible. The blob around Jakarta EE 10 just was there to show that Jakarta EE 10 specifications had to go to ballot in February, and they did. So Payara 6 Alpha 2 doesn't include any Jakarta EE 10 APIs. So our target, and this is slightly different, and I have this on a sort of textual slide next. So we're currently building and incorporating all the Jakarta EE 10 specifications. So obviously Payara community is open source. If you're brave and want to just compile it, then you can get where we are at this point in time. Our plan is to likely release, as soon as we've got every specification in, then we will likely release a Alpha 3. That may or may not pass the TCK, probably not. Then in this quarter as well, we'll also release Payara 6 Beta. And that could be the one that we actually certified Jakarta E10 support on, depending on when Jakarta E10 comes out, because it depends on how we're doing. So we will have a beta release before we have a final. Once the Jakarta E10 platform comes out, then we will certify on Payara 6 final when it passes all the TCKs. And so the difference between beta and final from our perspective is beta would pass the EE10 compatibility. Final would have everything that we need to do to Payara that we want to be in Payara 6, and it passes the Jakarta E10 platform. So there's a subtle difference between the two. Obviously, we want to release something that passes the EE10 compatibility TCK as close as possible to the release of that Jakarta E10 platform in Eclipse. So our team is working frantically to make sure that they can be as close to that release date as they possibly can. So there will be two. There'll be a beta, which will be Jakarta E10 compatible. Then there will be a final, which incorporates areas of changes to Payara that we want to include in a 6 release. So one of the major changes that we're working with at the minute is Payara 5 includes some fork of Tomcat, which is very old and is a big maintenance nightmare because we have to check and track Tomcat CVEs and security issues, and then see whether they apply to the version of Tomcat that was forked by Sun many years ago and apply them onto the Payara 5 code base. So we're moving a lot of that onto an embedded, a real embedded version of Tomcat, so that we can support and just take fixes from upstream Tomcat to make it more Tomcat compatible. So that's a big piece of work. Hopefully it hits final. And there's some other things that need to be done. For example, we need to make sure all the admin console's working and new JSF. We need, there's other features that we're looking at to make sure that everything's just working. And once that's done, final will come out. What I haven't done here is overlaid what's happened to Payara 5. So Payara 5 community had its penultimate release this month or last month, or very recently anyway. And after 6 comes out, the final release of 5 will come out at some time after it. So there will be an overlap, but the Payara Community 5 final will come out after Payara 6 final. So that as in the terminal release of Payara 5 Community. And I'll touch on that a bit more when I talk about Jakarta 8 support. So there should be a period of time when that happens. Then Payara 6 Community, again, targeting is Q2, and then Payara 6 Enterprise will come out on Q3 2022. So again, Enterprise, I will touch on in the next slides, why that doesn't follow straight after Community. So to put that in a textual format, so first we'll do Alpha 1, that's released. Alpha 2 is released on Jakarta 9. Alpha 2 is Jakarta 9.1 and Microprofile 5 support. Then Alpha 3 is what we're doing now. That will have a full set of Jakarta 10 specifications. Payara 6 Community Beta will be a compatible implementation, and then we'll likely have a final as well, which will include everything that else we need to do on Payara 6 before we want to release. And then Payara 6 Enterprise will come out in Q3 2022. So again, slightly showing the support for different APIs for the different versions. So on the top here, we have Payara 5 Community. So Payara 5 Community is a Jakarta 8 runtime. Currently on Payara 5 Community, you can run it on JDK 8, JDK 11, and JDK 17. Also, currently on Payara 5 Community, you can deploy Jakarta 8 and Jakarta 9 applications. And what they do, a 9 application goes through a transformer, and as best as it possibly can, it turns it into an 8 application. There's some areas where that is impossible. For example, especially if people are doing string compares to the Jakarta namespace that they can't pick up. But in general, we try to make that solid, and it is pretty solid. Has some issues on very specific cases. So that's where Payara 5 community is. And as I say, we're in the penultimate release of that, and the final release of it will come after, or the terminal release will come after Payara 6 final. Okay, so Payara 6 community, when it ships, will support Jakarta 10 applications only, and it will support JDK 11 and JDK 17, which is the same as Jakarta 10 supports. And it'll be a Jakarta 10 runtime, pure and simple. Payara 6 Enterprise, again, which will come in Q3, that will, as far as possible, support Jakarta 8 applications and Jakarta 10 applications. Again, it'll be on JDK 11 and JDK 17. And there will be a transformer or tooling that enables you to migrate as far as possible a Jakarta 8 application so that it can run on a Jakarta 10 runtime, and as far as possible without you making any source code changes. The transformation that will be in Payara 6 Enterprise will be based on work that's working in the Eclipse Foundation in the Eclipse Transformer project. So, there will be, the reason that's coming out 2 or 3 months after community is that we're building migration tooling for enterprise customers to move from 5 to 6, and also building migration tooling to move EE8 applications over to EE10 and as far as possible. So there's a gap there as we do that sort of work. So what does that mean if you support Jakarta 8 and your applications are based on Jakarta E8? So this shows our support timeline for Jakarta E8 applications. So at some point, Payara 5 is going to cut over to Payara 6. And that means that application support on Payara community will cut over from Jakarta 8 to Jakarta 10 at some point in Q2. As I said on the previous couple of slides, there will be a Payara 6 final before there is a Payara 5 terminal release. So there will be a period of time between the two. So it won't be like Payara 6 final out, there is no more Payara 5 releases. There will be one terminal release post Payara 6 final coming out. What's in that release will probably be anything that major bug fixes that have come along, anything related to the Jakarta 9 support that may be not working as much as we can, and essentially leaving that as a stable baseline for people to continue on for Payara 5 and give them a target that they can use. When it comes to enterprise, we still support Payara 4. So Payara 4 is a javax 7 runtime, and that's still in maintenance, and that's end of life isn't until 2025. It's currently setting extended maintenance, which means it gets critical bug fixes and any security patches on an ad hoc basis at the minute, as requested by customers. And there are many people still on javax 7, and that supports Payara 4 is a JDK 8 runtime server. Payara 5 Enterprise, as I say, is based on Jakarta 8. It doesn't enter what we call maintenance until 2023. So Payara 5 will still get development, will still get features, we'll still get new capabilities, new certifications on new JDKs, operating system databases, and all the things that we do with Payara 5 Enterprise. And that continues into 2023. And once it reaches our maintenance, then it won't get any more new major features, but it'll still get certifications on different JDKs and updates, bug fixes, and before it goes into extended maintenance like Payara 4 currently. But so Payara 5 Enterprise is supported out into 2028. So if you're on Enterprise, then Jakarta 8, and you need to support Jakarta 8 applications, and that will continue for another 6 years. And then Payara 6 Enterprise kicks off, as I mentioned earlier, in Q3 2022, when we've built tooling to help people migrate. So why is it like this? Really is because of our split between enterprise and community. So Payara community we want to be able to move fast, focus it on needs of development community, and focus on leading edge innovation. So the new all EE10 work, for example, is going into community first. Payara 6 will then be a cut of community, and with additional capabilities added on top of it. So basically, community is there, and we'll switch over onto the 6 branch so that we can focus on driving further 6 development and bringing new capabilities into 6, and bringing new features as we see fit as fast as possible. So enterprise is coming a bit slower because we realized that enterprise is for mission critical production environments for most of our customers, and therefore we need to make sure that everything is there and that we have some tooling and capabilities for migration, and that we have backwards compatibility as far as possible between Jakarta EE8 and Jakarta EE10. So enterprise will follow, and we'll focus on that stability and tooling. So Payara 6 is a turning point from our perspective for Jakarta EE8. It's possible to remain on Payara 5 community. There will be that terminal release, but after that point, it's unlikely to get any security updates or patching or bug fixes. Whereas at this point in time, if you do need to migrate, if you can't migrate onto EE8, then you're probably better off moving on to Payara Enterprise, Payara 5 Enterprise, as that keeps you supported and with tools, etc., to help you migrate when the time's right over to Jakarta EE10. And that gives you many years to do so. So Payara 6 is a turning point for Jakarta EE8, just as Jakarta EE10 is a turning point for the namespace and the Jakarta EE platform as a whole. It obviously has many breaking changes, especially due to the namespace. So if you are on Jakarta EE8, we do recommend moving into Payara Enterprise. This is because you get 6 more years of Jakarta EE8 support. We can develop tooling to help Jakarta EE8 applications, and obviously we have accelerator services to help you migrate onto Jakarta EE10. So it's definitely, from our perspective, a time, if you are on Payara 5 community, to look at either migrating onto Jakarta EE10 and moving on to Payara 6 community, or if that's not possible for you, looking at moving on to Payara Enterprise so that we can support you on Jakarta EE8 for a long time. So Payara Enterprise, we've just done a survey of our customers, and we did have a very high NPS survey. 65 out of 100 is very good, and we do have a very good support team, a very good product in Payara Enterprise, and we do encourage people to look at that for continued Jakarta EE8 support. So if we look at then beyond the Payara 6 final release, which for our development team is quite difficult for them to see beyond at this point of time, Community 6 final, as they're all dedicated onto Payara 6 community, getting that over the line. We do have roadmaps beyond Payara 6 community final release and enterprise final. So Q3 of this year, we're looking at what we're calling intelligent platform, and some work will be done in Q3. So what we're calling intelligent platform is Payara platform as a whole. This is both community and enterprise, has a lot of monitoring capabilities, a lot of tracing capabilities, and but they're quite disparate and in different sort of APIs, different admin commands, different setups. So from an intelligent platform perspective, we're looking at bringing this all into a single coherent monitoring and tracing infrastructure within the server. And that will see its light of day in community first, and then we'll move into enterprise later. But Q3 is where we're looking to do a lot of work on that. In Q4, one of the things we want to do is look at the developer experience, make sure that we can improve developer experience within the Payara products and Jakarta EE in general, and see what we can do both in the IDE plugins and taking advantage of new capabilities in Jakarta EE 10, and look at ideas to improve developer experience. We're also focusing on core profile, so in how we support the core profile. That's coming out in Jakarta EE 10. We will, of course, take Payara Micro and certify it on core profile, so that'll be our initial implementation, but we're also looking at different implementations, really, whether we can take something that is purely based on the existing core profile APIs and build something, a runtime around that. So Payara Micro currently is actually based on web profile plus some additional specs, which we think are useful, and it will stay that way, but it will certify on the core profile TCK. But as I said, Q4, we're looking at additional runtime options for support of core profile. And microprofile 6 is currently slated to perhaps be released in Q4, and we will support and implement microprofile 6 in Q4 2022. Finally, I mean, from where we are as a company, we want to be first for Jakarta EE developers. We're totally committed to Jakarta EE, the Jakarta EE working group, and driving Jakarta EE forward. Looking at Jakarta 11, I'm hoping in Jakarta, I haven't got a slide for this, but I'm hoping in Jakarta 11 we'll see new specifications come in, like Jakarta config, perhaps one that will support gRPC. All of the runtimes typically support gRPC, but they all do it in a different way. So some standardization of how we do that will be a good thing. There's some suggestions around NoSQL and a data spec and other specifications like that. So the team here will always be bringing these capabilities to you first through Payara community. And we're focused on Jakarta EE. And we're also focused on Jakarta EE and the model it has of basically you build a deployable application and then you can run it anywhere. So our goal is to enable you to basically write your business logic, package it up into a WAR file or some other Jakarta EE deployment, and then allow us to take that application and run it on various different platforms. So our platform has been built out with currently Payara Micro would be on small devices or containers, moving into Payara Server, which has traditional domain model, but also supports running on containers right through to Kubernetes. And then again, Payara Cloud is our software that will basically sits on top of Kubernetes and hybrid cloud to create a single runtime where you can just deploy an application onto it as a WAR file, and it would just run and manage all that Kubernetes infrastructure and public cloud infrastructure. So we're still building out on that vision during 2022. And part of the intelligent platform is to build on the fact that we are a managed runtime. When we're a managed runtime, we can take your application, we put lots of hooks into your application during deployment. We know what the application contains, and therefore we should be able to give you insights and knowledge of how your application is running and how it could improve, and how you could tune, etc., like that. So very much like the advantage of running Java on the JVM as opposed to running Java as a compiled binary. You get hotspot, you get capabilities to diagnostics and analytics. So that's where we are. So thank everybody. And questions, Jaden?
Hi, yes, we currently have two.
Okay.
Philip asks, we've been testing with Payara 6 Alpha 2. Does this version contain the Jakarta EE 9 transformer?
It might do, but in the sense, which won't, it doesn't contain a transformer that would go from 9 to 8. It might still contain the transformer that takes 8 to 9. But, sorry, the other way around. It's probably still contains, no, hang on, I'm confusing myself now. So Alpha 6 Alpha has not got any capability to transform back into an 8 application, but it should contain all the Jakarta 9 APIs, if I've answered the question correctly.
Oliver asks, will a future version of Payara 6 incorporate a micro-profile config source for JSON/YAML? Will this be something you would accept a community contribution for?
It's not something that we have on a roadmap, and we'd absolutely accept a contribution for. There is a part of the repo that has some of these things in. That's where the repo should be targeted to. But yes, we'd absolutely welcome a community contribution.
Awesome.
Or raise an enhancement and describe what you want it to do as well. We are actively working on those ecosystem components. We're still actively working on the cloud connectors, those things, and we'll move those over as well into Jakarta EE10.
Okay, great. Carlos asks, is it safe to assume that after Payara 6, there will no longer be the possibility for drop-in replacement from Glassfish?
After which version, sorry?
Payara 6.
Is it? It's Payara 6 is, well, Payara 6 is no further away from Glassfish than, say, Payara 5. Some of the internals may have changed, but if we get the Tomcat change in, but I don't think that should be user visible really. So Payara 6 probably isn't any less a replacement for Glassfish than, say, Payara 5 is. Glassfish 7 will be purely Jakarta EE10. Payara 6 will be purely Jakarta EE10. Most of the components internally will be similar. I mean, we're not a like for like anymore, and we haven't been for quite a long time. So, but it won't be any worse with 6 than it is with 5. We've got a hell of a lot of bug fixes and updates on Payara that are not in upstream Glassfish.
Next one, Andres asks, what about prices for the Enterprise Payara Edition?
Prices, if you email or fill in a form on the website, then pricing will come to you. If you just request that, then they can get to you on pricing. So it's price per core, CPU core.
Yeah, I'll put that in there. But this is something that for people that need to migrate or worried about Payara 6, we're talking to a lot of people at the minute. So Andres, this is a good time to get in touch. I'm going to put in page here. John has just put in a link to sales guys where they can have a conversation and determine your needs. And I think that is everything currently. If there's any more questions, guys, feel free to send us an email or reach out to us on social media. Like I said before, we're going to put this recorded video on YouTube as well. But thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks.